What is going on, everyone? It is Connor, the co-host with the most, back with the final 2022 college football preview for Clutch Crew Sports. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about the SEC West, the final division in our group of videos previewing the college football season. Zach and I recently, on our last podcast episode that came out on Tuesday, we did our full college football preview. So the standings in this conference might be a little, or in this division might be a little spoiled because of that, but make sure you go back and check that out if you haven't already. We did our playoff predictions and our some of our dark horse teams that we're looking out for, and also previewed our favorite teams as well. So make sure you guys go and check that out, but this will be the final video in the series of division previews that Zach and I have been doing. We've covered all 5 of the Power 5 conferences, as well as the American Athletic Conference. And this is going to wrap it up here with the SEC West. This division is definitely an interesting division of teams. It's basically kind of broken up into 3 groups. You've got the bottom 3 teams that are, it's kind of debatable what direction or what position you could put them in. There's the middle 3 teams, which again is debatable which direction you could put them in. And then there's the top team, which I'm sure will come as no surprise to anyone who watches this video, but just in case, we'll get to that eventually. But let's start here with the number 7 team, and I'm going to go ahead and take the Auburn Tigers as the number 7 team. Like I said, these bottom 3 can kind of go a lot of ways. There's some people that have Auburn up as high as number 5. I'm going to have them down here at number 7 as the worst team in the conference, or in the division at least. They were 6th in the division last year. They were 3-5 in conference play, 6-7 overall. They did end the season on a 5-game losing streak, which included blowing that final game against Alabama. They had a really good chance to beat Alabama in that final game, and unfortunately they blew it at the end. For everyone who's not an Alabama fan, that was really unfortunate. But looking at their schedule here, of course they have to play all the teams in the West. They do have to draw Georgia from the East, which is really tough. The other team that they get to draw from the East is going to be... why am I blanking on this right now? Is Missouri. The other team that they get to draw from the East is Missouri, which I always found that funny that Missouri is in the SEC East. So those are the 2 teams that have to draw from the East. My key game for them is going to be the game against LSU on October 1st. A team that's kind of on their level, that's in their division. I think they should be able to beat Missouri. They're probably going to start the season 3-1, possibly, if I have to guess. Maybe 2-2 if they lose to Missouri. I'm assuming they're going to lose to Penn State. But they'll win the first 2 games. But, this is really important for them. A home game, a home SEC game against a winnable, against a lower team in the SEC. The rest of their SEC schedule after this is going to be brutal. Georgia, Ole Miss, Arkansas. They get a little bit of a break with Mississippi State, but then Texas A&M and Alabama. Unfortunately, in my mind, they have no chance against Alabama this year. Auburn's one of those teams that, that's a big rivalry they have with Alabama, and no matter how bad Auburn is, it seems like they always give Alabama a good game when they play in Auburn. But unfortunately for Auburn, they're going to be playing in Tuscaloosa this year, which means that they're probably going to get their butts handed to them by Alabama. So normally I'd pick that game, but since if it was in Auburn, I'd probably pick that game. But since it's in Tuscaloosa, I'm going to say that Auburn gets destroyed in that game. So we're going to go with their game against LSU as their key game. So they're going to rank 3rd out of the 7 teams in the experience rank. Their program status is they lost a lot of players in the transfer portal. So their status is just going to be recovering from that and trying to get back to that winning culture in Auburn. The SEC West has always kind of been the powerhouse of the SEC. They've got, with Alabama, LSU, Texas A&M, Auburn, and, occasionally, like Ole Miss has been good. So the West is usually seen as the powerhouse of the SEC, whereas the East has pretty much just kind of been Georgia and Florida. But Auburn's not really a powerhouse this year. They weren't a powerhouse last year, so they're trying to get back to that point because, Auburn, they've contended for the West Division crown in the past. They won a national championship a little over 10 years ago. Auburn has a history of being a winning team, and I know it's paining them to be in this situation and the fact that they can't even compete with Alabama, their biggest rival. But their key player is going to be tight end John Samuel Schenker. His role is just going to be helping new starting quarterback TJ Finley. They did lose Bo Nix, which in my mind was kind of a good thing because Nix had really been inconsistent for them over the time that he had spent there. So At times he looked like he could be one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC, and at other times he looked like one of the worst quarterbacks in the SEC. So I think it's a good change for them, but it's definitely going to be up to the veteran tight end to help their new quarterback settle in. So moving on to number 6, we're going to have the Mississippi State Bulldogs. They were 5th in the division last year, 4-4 in the conference, 7-6 overall. They have a pretty brutal schedule as well. All these teams in the West have brutal schedules because the top 4 teams in the West are all ranked in the top 20, basically. I mean, Ole Miss is 21, so they're all ranked in the top 21. They do have to draw Georgia, just like Auburn. They draw Georgia out of the East. The other team they draw out of the East is Kentucky, so they definitely drew a brutal schedule out of the East. So not only do they have to go against these hard-hitting West teams, but they have to go against Kentucky and Georgia as well. My key game for them is going to be the game at Ole Miss. There's definitely some other winnable SEC games on their schedule, like the one against Auburn or the one against LSU. But I'm picking the one at Ole Miss just because, that's a rivalry game. Rivalry games are always close for the most part. There are some exceptions to that, but, Mississippi State, Ole Miss is a little bit unpredictable this year. They're not as strong as they were last year, so maybe Mississippi State has a chance there. Of course, they're going to get to go into that game coming off a, pretty easy matchup against ETSU, so at least they're not going to have to be going into that game coming off a big-time loss to someone like Georgia or Alabama. So I'm going to take that game against Ole Miss. They do have a home game against Memphis to start the year, which should be an interesting game. Memphis is one of the better teams in the American Athletic Conference, so that'll be an interesting game for them, of course. And then, their other out-of-conference games against Arizona and Bowling Green should be easy wins. It's just that Memphis game is going to be an interesting one for me to see how they start the season. So they are actually going to rank 1st out of 7 in the experience rank here. It's a very experienced team coming back. The main reason why I have them this low is, they're not as good as the top teams in this division, but also just, like I said, the brutal schedule they have. I mean, having to play Georgia and Kentucky from the East is not easy at all. Their program status is going to be keeping up the momentum from their first winning season since 2018, and just keeping that bowl streak alive. I've talked about this in some of the previous videos. Just getting to a bowl game is pretty important. Even though bowl games are meaningless, it's still kind of like a report card on your season and how your program is doing. If you're constantly getting to bowl games, then it kind of shows, okay, like you have the potential to do something here. Whereas if you're constantly missing out on bowl games, when it comes to teams like Kansas and Vanderbilt and teams like that constantly miss out, then it's not a good look. But at least, like, getting to a bowl game, okay, there's potential here. Mississippi State has had some success in the past, so, this isn't a team who is always consistently at the bottom of the SEC West. They've had some success in the past. Their key player is going to be quarterback Will Rogers. He's a top 10 quarterback. He's one of the, he's a top 10 draft prospect for the NFL next year. There's a really good quarterback class that's going to be going into the NFL draft. And that's the strength of this Mississippi State team is the offense. The defense is a little bit shaky, but this is a very high-powered offense with Rodgers and the receiving group they have here. So it's going to be up to him and that receiving group to get them to put up lots of points on the board and try and keep them in some of these tougher SEC games that they're going to be playing. Moving on to number 5 is going to be the LSU Tigers. They were last in this division last year. They were 3-5 in conference play, 6-7 overall. Looking at their schedule here, out of the East, they draw Tennessee and Florida, which the Tennessee game, both of those in my mind I see as losses. They're home against Tennessee, but I did predict Tennessee to be the second best team in the East, so I think that's going to be a loss. And then going on the road at Florida is always tough. So my key game that I'm going to have for them is going to be their home game against Mississippi State on September 17th. A winnable conference game for them. Ideally, they should go into this game 2-0. I see them beating Florida State in Week 1, and of course they're going to beat Southern. Like, they're not going to lose that. So important for them to get their SEC schedule off to a good start. If everything goes well for them, it's possible that they could go into that game against Tennessee 5-0. If they beat Mississippi State, and then Auburn's also a very winnable game for them. So it's possible that early in the season this could look like a really good team. But then, of course, they're going to hit the gauntlet once they hit Tennessee, because once that happens, that's when their real SEC schedule starts, and we're going to find out what LSU is truly made of. But I'm going to take that Mississippi State game. Like I said, it's just to get them off to a good start, because if they lose that game, then it's going to be bad for LSU going forward if they can't beat Mississippi State at home. Death Valley is one of the hard Death Valley between LSU's Death Valley and Clemson's Death Valley. I know they fight over which one is the true Death Valley, but I think LSU's came first. But regardless, LSU's a really tough place to play. So getting a win against Mississippi State in Week 3 is crucial to get off to a good start. So they're going to be ranking 5th out of 7 in the experience rank. One of the reasons why I have them up here at number 5 is because I really like the head coaching change they made. A lot of people were going back and forth with LSU and Auburn, like between 5th and 7th. It was pretty consensus for the most part that Mississippi State was going to be 6th. I kept seeing everything I looked at was different. Like someone would have Auburn at 7, someone would have LSU at 7, someone would have LSU at 5, someone would have LSU or Auburn at 5. I have them up here just because of the coaching, honestly. Like I said, they've got new head coach Brian Kelly, who came from Notre Dame. It was time for Ed Orgeron to go. The program was failing under him, after their national championship win in 2019. And that's a big thing for me. Coaching is huge. It's going to be interesting the first few weeks just because, you're implementing a new system. But I think that gives them an advantage over a fair amount of these other teams in the SEC. Their key player is going to be defenseman BJ Ojulari. I don't know if he's related to Azeez Ojulari. I didn't actually do the proper research on that before this video, but he might be related to Azeez Ojulari, who is already in the NFL. And this is the top 10 defensive line. He's the star on this defensive line. So, LSU is always known for having a stingy defense, so that's going to be important for them, especially with this offense that's going to be, trying to get its footing back and trying to get things going again. So now we're moving into what I mentioned at the top of the video, the middle tier. I mentioned that those bottom 3 teams could kind of go either way. Now we're getting into the middle tier with these next 3 teams. But at number 4 here, I'm going to have Ole Miss. They were 2nd in the division last year. They were 6-2 overall, 10-3, or 6-2 in the conference, 10-3 overall. Looking at their schedule, they draw Kentucky and Vanderbilt out of the East, so one hard, one easy matchup. They do have they do have to go on the road against Texas A&M and Arkansas, which is unfortunate. The other 2 of the other teams in this division, they do have a home game against Alabama, but I'm not sure how much of a difference that's going to make. But I have their key game as the home game against Kentucky, just because it's the start of their SEC schedule. Unlike a lot of these other SEC teams, they have all of their non-conference games to start. It seems to be a popular trend in the SEC to where they have 3 of them early in the season, and then, they'll have one, really late in the season. But Ole Miss actually has all 4 of them at the start, and if everything goes well, they should be going into this game against Kentucky 4-0. None of their non-conference opponents are threatening. Georgia Tech's one of the worst teams in the ACC. And Tulsa and Troy are a group of 5 teams, so they should be able to easily cruise through those and get to this game against Kentucky. And, it's going to be a real test for them. Kentucky and Ole Miss, they're both ranked, in the AP poll. Kentucky's number 20, Ole Miss is 21, so they're right next to each other in the rankings. And again, a start of the SEC schedule is good to get off to a good start, especially since after this game, they're going to be going into 3 easier matchups against Vanderbilt, Auburn, and LSU. 3 games that for their sake, they should hopefully be able to win before going into the gauntlet playing Texas A&M, Alabama, and Arkansas. So definitely important for them to get this win so that way they can keep building momentum before they hit that gauntlet towards the end of the season. So they're going to be ranking 6 out of 7 in the experience rank. That's one of the reasons why I have them at the lower end of these group of teams here. Ooh, excuse me. So their program status is going to be their first 10-win season since 2015 last year. They were very active in the transfer portal. They brought in over 15 transfers to help boost this team. So they're low on the experience rank in terms of returning players, but they did bring in a lot of transfers. So it's one of the reasons why this team is still one of the upper teams in the SEC. They're in terms of the AP rankings, they're 4th in this division, but they're 6th overall in the SEC behind the 3 teams ahead of them in this division, plus Kentucky and Georgia in terms of the rankings. So, and it's mostly thanks to those transfers. Their key player is going to be quarterback Jackson Dart. a transfer from USC. He transferred out after Caleb Williams transferred into USC, and he's going to be the one that's replacing Matt Corral, who got drafted into the NFL. Unfortunately for Matt Corral, we're not going to get to see him at all this year in the NFL because he did go down with the season-ending Lisfranc injury. So the Panthers have placed him on season-ending IR, but he's got big shoes to fill. You know, Matt Corral was a star here at Ole Miss. He led them to some key wins last year. You know, Ole Miss was ranked in the top 15 at the end of the year, which is something that hasn't happened in a long time. So definitely some big shoes for him to fill here. So at number 3, we're going to have the Arkansas Razorbacks. They were third in this division last year. They were 4-4 in the conference, 9-4 overall. Looking at their schedule here, they draw Missouri and they draw South Carolina out of the East. They do have to start the season against Cincinnati. That's going to be one of the best Week 1 matchups. Zach and I didn't really talk about this in our video, but you know, we're trying to look at some of the best Week 1 matchups in college football. This is going to be one of them. Cincinnati against Arkansas. Cincinnati, they're a bit of an unknown. They're still one of the best teams in the American Athletic, but they did lose a lot of pieces to the in the offseason, namely their quarterback. So that's definitely going to be an interesting game for them. They want to get a win in that one. The rest of their non-conference schedule is fairly simple. Liberty and Missouri State. They do also have to play BYU, so they do draw a couple tougher non-conference opponents here. But my key game for them is going to be the home game against Texas A&M on September 24th. It's going to be at a neutral site, so it's going to be a big game there, especially, these two teams, they're going to be fighting Alabama for number 1 in the West, and whichever wins that game right there is going to be the one that is going to, step out in front like, okay, this is the team that's going to be the one to take the challenge to Alabama. Especially for Arkansas, it's really important to win that game because they play Alabama right after that. So, they don't no rest for the wicked, as they say. They have to play Texas A&M, and then right the next week they go and play Alabama. So Arkansas definitely has a tougher schedule here, but that game against Texas A&M is going to be the most important one for me. They're going to be ranking 4th out of the 7 in the experience rank. Their program status is finally escaping. They finally escaped their losing ways. They had I can't remember how long it was, but they had one of the longest SEC winless droughts in quite a while. I can't remember how long it was, but they finally ended that. And they're trying to push for the West Crown. They do have a rebuilding defense this year. Their key player is going to be center Ricky Stromberg. Arkansas has a top 15 offensive line. Offensive line is very important in everything you do. It's, offensive linemen often don't get enough credit. You can't do anything on offense without an offensive line. I mean, if I'm using an NFL example, you could have, Patrick Mahomes, Devontae Adams, Jonathan Taylor, Tyreek Hill. You could have all these weapons on offense, but if you don't have an offensive line, then you can't use any of them. I mean, the Chiefs were evidence of that in the Super Bowl against the Buccaneers. They had all those weapons on offense, but the offensive line didn't hold up and they got demolished. So it's important to have a good offensive line, and Arkansas has one of the best ones in the SEC. So that's going to be important for them going forward into these matchups. So at number 2, I'm sure as most of you could have guessed, is Texas A&M. They were 4th in the division last year, 4-4 in the conference, 8-4 overall. They have been ranked number 6 in the AP poll, so definitely high praise there. Looking at their schedule here, they draw Florida and South Carolina out of the East. They do have an interesting non-conference schedule. They play Miami in Week 3, so that's definitely going to be an early test for them. They are at home for that one, but Miami is looking to be one of the best teams in the ACC this season. There's a lot of expectations around them, so that's a good early test for them. They do draw Appalachian State in Week 2, and while I'm not expecting Appalachian State to win that game, Appalachian State is one of those group of 5 teams that seems like they're always on upset watch. It's like, they're the team that they're one of those teams that everyone watches out for. If you rest on your laurels, then that team can somehow come out of nowhere and beat you. So definitely an interesting first couple of games there. before going to play Arkansas in that game I mentioned in the last entry. But my key game for them, A&M figures to be the best challenge to Alabama in the SEC this year. And so, of course, their key game is going to be the October 8th game at Alabama. Texas A&M has been known to pull off some upsets against Alabama in the past. They've been one of the most successful SEC teams against them since they joined the SEC. The other ones probably being, LSU and Auburn, of course, had success against them. But Texas A&M has done a really good job at competing with Alabama ever since they came to the SEC. So that's definitely going to be their key game, no doubt. That home game, that road game against Alabama, it's on the road. It's going to be tough, but to be the man, you got to beat the man. And if Texas A&M wants to be the team from the SEC this year that has the best chance to make the college football playoff, there's no better way to do it than by taking down Alabama. They are going to rank 7th out of 7 in the experience rank. Their program status, one of the reasons why they're ranked this high, even though they lost a lot of people, is they brought in some people from the transfer portal, but they did have the #1 recruiting class this year. I know Nick Saban, of course, was really kind of upset at Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M. Like, he was trying to throw out some accusations that Texas A&M went out and bought all their players. Nick Saban him and Dabo Swinney both have really not been fans of the new regulations, like the new NIL stuff in college football. They're not too excited about it because they know how to coach for the old way. And, Alabama and Clemson aren't huge markets like, Texas and California and some of these other, in Florida, like these bigger states are. So Texas A&M was able to use that to their advantage and get the #1 recruiting class. And it's just push for a national title. When you're ranked in the top 10 in the preseason, it's like that's all you're thinking about, making the college football playoff, making it to the national title game. Texas A&M has never made it to the college football playoff in their history. So now's the time to do it. They've been close on a couple occasions. They finished in the top 10 in ranking a couple seasons during the college football playoff era, but they've never actually made it. So, they're hoping that this is going to be the time. Their key player is going to be cornerback Miles Jones. Texas A&M is a top 3 secondary in the FBS, and it all starts with the defense. If you're going to want to stop the likes of these high-powered offenses like Alabama and, I know they don't play Ohio State, but if they get to the college football playoff, Ohio State, some of the other high-powered offenses in the SEC, you got to have a good defense and a good secondary, and Texas A&M has one of the best. So obviously this should come as no surprise to anyone who either watched our college football preview or just a college football fan. Of course, the #1 team in the SEC West is going to be the Alabama Crimson Tide. They're the #1 ranked team in college football. Looking at their schedule here, they draw, out of the East, they draw Tennessee, of course, who is their protected rival. They play Tennessee every year, and Vanderbilt. So they definitely have a nice, easy start to the schedule. They play Utah State, they play Texas, UL Monroe, and Vanderbilt. So should be a no-brainer, easy 4-0 start. But then they do go through a bit of a brutal part of the schedule. This is where, if Alabama's going to lose this year, this is definitely, this 3-game stretch here is definitely the best chance for that. They have to go at Arkansas, then they play Texas A&M, and then they have to go at Tennessee, which for me is going to be their key game. I could have easily picked the A&M game, but I already kind of picked that for A&M, so I'm going to stick with this game at Tennessee. I think Tennessee, I mentioned how I'm pretty high on them in the SEC East video, and, Tennessee is really hungry to beat Alabama. They haven't beat Alabama in a long time, and it's like they have to play them every year, so, when you're playing a team every year and you haven't beaten them in forever, it really starts to wear on you. And I think Tennessee, they're more motivated than ever this year to actually get this win over Alabama. And it's also going to be important for them just to close out this stretch of tough games, because then they have, the rest of their schedule after this is pretty easy. They do have a road game against Ole Miss on November 12th, but, other than that, Mississippi State, LSU, Austin Peay, and Auburn should all be easy wins for them. So it's really going to be important for them to close out that part of the schedule. And, for their sake, they're going to want to be undefeated coming out of that. Good news for Alabama is that, anyone would be stupid to think that there's not some bias when it comes to the College Football Playoff Committee. thing for Alabama is that they can afford to lose one of those games. You know, they're one of these teams that it seems like they can make it in no matter what most of the time. You know, they're one of the, you know, they can get in with one loss because they're Alabama. So they don't have to win all those games in the middle part of the schedule there. Obviously, if they do, that's huge. You know, and it's likely that they're going to be playing Georgia in the SEC championship game. So definitely going to be interesting to see what happens for them. But you know, they definitely get the benefit of the doubt a bit more when it comes to the college football playoff. But they're going to rank second out of 7 in the experience rank. You know, their program status, they're the best team in college football, as much as I hate to say it. You know, they have the best team. They're ranked number 1 for a reason. And they just got to recover from that Georgia loss. You know, they thoroughly thwomped them in the SEC title game, and it was looking like Alabama was going to be the no-brainer favorites to win the title, but then, you know, Georgia came back and they recovered from that loss and went on to beat them pretty handily in the championship. So it's all going to be up to Alabama. You know, Bryce Young is once again a Heisman candidate, so they have, you know, the reigning Heisman champion at quarterback. But their key player is going to be wide receiver Tyler Harrell. If there is a weakness to this team, it's definitely going to be the wide receiver core. You know, he's a transfer from Louisville. They lost Mechie and they lost Williams to the NFL draft. And, you know, they brought in, I can't remember his name, they brought in someone else to be the top receiver, but he's now hurt and going to be done for quite a while. So the wide receiver room is definitely a question mark. They have a great run game, and of course, I already mentioned they have Bryce Young, but, you know, Tyler Harrell is going to have to step up and be the number 1 receiver because Bryce Young can't do it all on his own. So definitely going to be key on offense for them to get these receivers going because the rest of their team is absolutely stacked. Like I said, the run game, the quarterback, the defense is still one of the best in the country. So definitely looking for big things out of Alabama this year. But thanks, guys, so much for watching. The series is now complete, so if you missed any of our episodes, make sure you go back and check those out. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this series. You know, hopefully you enjoyed Zach and I's takes, and let us know down in the comments if you agree, disagree with our picks here. I doubt there's going to be too many people disagreeing with my number 1 pick here, but, you know, you never know. Some people have different opinions. But if you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit that like button and hit the subscribe button so that way you can stay tuned for all of our new videos. We're getting towards the end of our NFL previews as well. We're down to 2 more of those left, which will be coming out in the following days. We also have a little bit of a special project that each one of us is going to be releasing for our every year we do a fantasy football league for our podcast, where we get some friends and fans of the show to be in, and we're each going to be doing a special video for our fantasy football draft that's going to be taking place the day that this episode comes out. So make sure you guys stay tuned for those and for the rest of our NFL previews. And until then, I will see you guys next time.